Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you for letting me do your research.
Of course.
Karen, can you hear me okay if I just talk like this? Wonderful. Well, welcome, folks. I want to introduce myself and then introduce the folks who are here. I'm Allison Rogers, Superintendent of Schools here. And with us this evening, we have Dr. Matt Naylor, who's our Assistant Superintendent, is here. Brian Callahan, High School Principal. Kim Tynan, our Clinical Director. Jack Foley, our Middle School Principal. And Detective Chip Devlin, who's our School Resource Officer. I also wanted to acknowledge in the room tonight, Jen Kirkland is here from the Rec Department. And Fred Kalin, who's the head of Shrewsbury Family Services, is here tonight. Just as a show of community support, which is fantastic. Really the goal of tonight is to kind of introduce to you how we're thinking about the Phone-Free Schools initiative and how we're planning to launch it. Give you time, really the most important time is to give you time to ask questions and hear answers to questions, which also will help us in our planning process. We want to be sure that we're being really thorough and thoughtful when it comes to this initiative and that we do a good job. I think it's important. I will say, just for the record, every school district that I've gone to, every superintendent that I've talked to where this is taking place, there's not a single educator who regrets it. It is sort of anecdotally, boots on the ground, seems to be having a very positive impact on school environments. And I think that's really important to know. And that's not hard data, but it is useful from my perspective as a school leader. So, why now, I think, is an important question. And I think the why now question has a few parts. One is we feel like there's really good momentum in the community, in part created by our friends at Westborough Connects, who helped promote Westborough Unplugs as an initiative in town and really sort of put a spotlight on ways for the community to connect more by unplugging from our devices and being more present with each other, being more outside, really being more active and engaged in the community. In addition, the work here at Mill Pond School, I think has really paved the way for what happens next. So we have a generation of kids now at Mill Pond who are used to the notion that when you are at school, you are not with the device. And I think that means we are ready in many ways to sort of roll that up into the middle and high school levels. Our real mission is to get back some things that they're not completely absent. I want to be really clear. Things look good in our middle school and our high school. However, we think they could be even better. So things like focus on class, connection with classmates, and sort of the type of joy in learning and interaction that I think I remember as a student, and I remember as a young teacher in an era before we had phones in the school environment. So that's really our goal, is how do we get back to that? Our commitment is to try and work so that this feels like a shift that's about a positive gain, not a punitive reaction to something. And I think that's going to take some training and support for our staff to make sure that the approach feels like that, but we're very committed to doing that. Another point it's important to make is that legislation around bell-to-bell phone-free schools has passed both the House and the Senate in Massachusetts. It's in reconciliation. So we feel like now is a good time for us to do this before we're told to do it. It gives us a little bit of a running start at a thing and an opportunity to be more proactive instead of reactive. So for this, I want to kind of hit up some of our panelists here to talk a little bit about what we've seen. And even with an often away policy at the secondary level, so our middle school and high school kids who come into the school environment, they're expected in classes to have their phones off or have their phones put away during the day. There are still disruptions that happen, and there are still things that we feel like could be better. In addition, we know what the research says, and we know what our own data says about social and emotional impacts and how much our kids are accessing their phones during school and outside of school. So I know any of our administrators or folks on the panel want to speak a little bit to these issues. But.
Sure. Good evening. Brian Callahan, the high school principal. Approximately 3 years ago, we had moved not more than that actually, now that I think about it. We had moved to, the phones just get in the way of learning, so let's keep the focus on classroom instruction, classroom learning, have the phone in between classes, maybe at our morning break and some of the social times like lunch. But for the most part, let's come up with a system where it's a responsibility of the student and the teacher within guidelines to keep the phone away unless it's to be used for educational purposes, like taking photos of labs in science or doing some clicker work in history classes and so on. But for the most part, that's been effective. But as Allison said, we could do so much better because halfway through the year, adolescents, teachers, some fatigue sets in. And we don't have 100% compliance. So where we don't have that kind of compliance, we have noticed that focus diminishes, learning gaps start to come up with some of our students again into that second half of the year, and behaviors for some students increase, and that's where the phone is available to someone. They can see what someone said about them, or the social media piece of that. Someone liked something and didn't like another thing, and that led to something at lunch that was difficult to for everybody involved. And again, not on a massive scale, but enough to know even our most successful effort to keep phones in the holders and have them away during class time, it just is not as effective as we would like it to be. It's good, but we could do better.
I'll just add to that a little bit and talk about what our students have been telling us. So as many of you know, we survey our students every other year. We've been doing that since 2006. And starting in 2023, we started asking our students, and it's an anonymous survey, we asked them about their social media use and the impact. And they were surveyed again this fall, so it's every 2 years. It's 2023 and then fall of 2025. And we have seen a 20% increase in the amount of time kids are spending using their phones for more than 3 hours a day on not school-related social media platforms. So 20% increase. And in addition to kids telling us they're using their phones more, they're also telling us that it is worsening their concentration, so they are supporting your observations with their voice. And they're telling us that it is disrupting their sleep at very high percentages, and that it's also affecting their mental health. So I feel like our kids are telling us that they need help, that it is affecting them. Thank you.
Hi, Jack Pulido. So, a couple things. The phones are distracting, period. It's that fact. Phones are distracting. And social media is distracting kids. And whenever I have a captive audience of parents, one of the things that I always try to put on the table is the utmost importance of keeping track of kids' social media. Because it's not just the phone, it's any device and you're on social media stuff. And for those of us that did not grow up in this era, and we're not on these massive group chats, it's the Wild West. In these group chats of kids that are 20, 30, 40 kids deep, and there are no kind of social norms attached to it, and no one's checking on it. And so the bad analogy of many bad analogies that I have is it's like a house party when you were a teenager, okay? In terms of it's kind of no rules at that point. And those are the social groupings and the conversations that are happening that are incredibly worrisome. They're happening outside of school, in bedrooms. They're happening in school when kids have access to those devices. So the phones are a component of that. In school, the phone's a distracting period. There's no two ways about that. In terms of if the kid's on the phone, they're not paying attention to what's going on around them. They're absolutely missing out on what we would think of as typical social interactions. Quick anecdote. A couple of years ago, when we were kind of coming back from COVID, and at the middle school, we have phones off once school starts. So kids are using the phone in the cafeteria before school starts. So the school starts, and we're leaving the cafeteria, everyone's going home with the expectation at that point is off and away in the lobby. And it was day after February vacation. And kids are all coming back. And I'm in the cafeteria, and a group of kids, popular 8th grade kids, all come into the cafeteria, and they're all sitting down at the cafeteria table. This is a social group. This is a friend group. And it's the first day back, and they haven't seen each other ostensibly in 5-7 days. You would think they'd be chatting about what they did on break, did they go somewhere, whatever. They're all on the phone. They're sitting across from each other at a table. This is like 6 guys that are friend groups, they're teammates, and they're all just doing the thing on the phone as opposed to talking to each other. And that is not unusual. And that's the dynamic that if you haven't grown up with it, and if you don't see this on a regular basis, that's the dynamic that we're watching play out. When the kids are in this zone, you have a bunch of kids that are just talking, using the phone. They could be texting the person that's sitting across from them at the table. They're just not talking to them. So we have a similar dynamic to a lesser scale at the middle school, and through the good work of our counseling team. So for a long while, we let the kids use the Chromebooks during lunch. Some kids were doing homework. Some kids were, playing innocuous games, and it limited the amount of interaction. Through the good work of our counseling team, they nudged me repeatedly to end that practice, and instead, we have board games and cards, and I didn't know. These kids aren't going to play, Battleship. They play Battleship on a regular basis, and they are engaged with each other in ways that I did not think were going to be realistic for middle school kids, but are very, very realistic. So on a daily basis, the kids are playing cards with each other, they're talking to each other, they're doing board games with each other on a daily basis. We don't have the kids on the Chromebook. And the kids were interacting, playing games with each other on the Chromebook, but it's that level of this is a new world. This is the world that the kids are living in now, that I'm an observer of. I don't live in that world, on a regular basis, but this is the world that the kids are in and is their lives. So that's a couple of minutes.
And Officer Dapple asked to comment in part to technical. Just thinking a little bit about some of the safety issues and conflicts in and out of school that phones and devices, social media kind of certainly impacted your job or your perspective.
Sure. Quickly, Chip Dapley, school resource officer for the town. I can tell you firsthand, easy enough for me. Once they implemented, especially at the high school, phones go in a way and put in a holder during class. My instances of online bullying, harassment during school time is gone down. I can tell you that for a fact. During COVID, when we first got back, I was quite busy. Even when we were in those pods or those groups, it was a little bit trying because limiting the cell phone use was a little bit limited, to be quite honest with you. But now, it's actually helping out a bit, quite a bit. And I'm very appreciative. My workload's going down a little bit, which I'm happy about. I'm always happy about that because there's more time for the students and smiling and shaking hands in the hallway. But I have to tell you, if this goes through and we get to this point where I'm hoping we get to, it'll help a lot. Safety-wise, of course, I know parents have a lot of questions about safety-wise, wanting to get in touch with their children, and stuff like that. I'm sure we'll be addressing that at a little bit later time in this presentation. If not, I can talk on that right now. But
Sure, if you want to push that out.
so for me, it's pretty simple. Every classroom has a phone in it. Hardwired phone, which I like even more. They can all call 911. They have to press an outside line. They press 911. Anybody can do it. It's something's going from a problem with teacher. A student can do it on a hard landline. The other thing that I personally think is very important is a critical emergency. We had kind of a test of it at the high school last year. If there's a critical emergency in the classroom, I want the students to be focused on the teacher and listening to instructions. I find a lot of videos online, which is great for me as a resource of active violent intruders that are in school, and the students, the first thing they'll do is take out their phone and record it. Great for me because I can look at that video. I actually do presentations and have some of those videos. I would much prefer that student to think about their personal safety and getting to safety. There's things in place that after something happens, parents will be notified, and we have things in place that will tell parents where to go, how to pick up and stuff like that if there's a dismissal. There's also a great system in place where they have an automated call that goes out, especially through the school, but we also have it through the town, and the town-wide emergency line system that we use. So we have all those tools in place already. The big number one thing is I want the students to be safe and get themselves safe. I don't want to have a distraction on them of being tempted to record something or staring at their phone or waiting for something or trying to call somebody else. I want them to get to safety, and I want them to listen to teachers and also listen to police officers. There's a great video out there I use in my presentation where police officers had to enter a classroom, things had calmed down, and all the students were videotaping. They weren't listening to the officer's instructions of keeping their hands visible. They were reaching pockets for their phones. They were doing things that were making the officers very concerned. Well, they were just reaching for a phone. I hope you understand, as a police officer, we always watch people's hands. And even reaching for a phone can be a dangerous situation because we don't know it's a phone. And that's it. I just want the students to be able to protect themselves, get to safety, and we'll get the word out to parents.
If I could just, part of my training as a high school principal looking to keep our campus safe relative to school threats, is great research and data that shows students actually using their cell phone greatly impacts law enforcement's ability to keep people safe. So if they're calling or trying to reach a loved one to tell them what's going on, that actually works against the response team pretty substantially. Not just blocking cell phone towers, but as Chip said, prevents them from following directions. So it might seem like a little counterintuitive, right? We want to call 911, we're told to call 911, get your phone, call 911. It actually works against the response team pretty considerably. So I always found that to be something worth sharing.
Kind of keep moving through this, and then we'll have some time for we don't have a ton of slides. There's a little bit of the research here, and there were handouts up top, so we didn't grab some on the way in. I hope you can on the way out. And I think some of the most compelling information that I think has to do with just the level of notification that most of our students are getting. So on the average, students who have a cell phone get 230 notifications a day, a quarter of which are happening during the school hours. That's just shy of 80 notifications a day. I like to think about the analogy of back when I was in school, we would pass notes to each other. Imagine getting 80 notes during the day and what that would do to your kind of learning focus. And that is actually the average, the kind of high end of this in terms of kids who are really saturated. It's up to 4,500 a day. So some of our kids who are really deep in, we worry about a lot in terms of impact. They do actual measures and scales around loneliness, trying to understand loneliness in school, which is a very big risk factor for dropout. Kids who report loneliness are at much higher risk of not finishing their education, and it has doubled since 2012, which is about when I hit the market. Kids who have phones with them take fewer notes in class, And when they are given multiple choice tests, kids without phones score a letter grade or a letter grade and a half higher. So there's clear evidence of academic, social impact that I think is really important. And there's some research that suggests that even the visible presence of a phone, so our current system where kids are putting their phones in a little shoe tree on the back of the door, which I think is a great step. The fact that they can kind of see it means it's sort of lingering there in the edge of their consciousness. I have that problem too. I left my phone off in an office somewhere, so I didn't have it sitting here and haunting me, and making me think about if there's anything going on. So I think those are some of the research that I think are particularly compelling. We really think having this building-wide and district-wide approach is helpful because it moves the emphasis for teachers on their kind of role. We want our teachers really focused on teaching and learning and not on enforcement. And when kids encounter kind of different approaches in different classrooms, they find ways to work around those inconsistencies. That's what they do. I mean, teenagers are hardwired to test our boundaries. That's their developmental job, unfortunately. And our job is to try and hold those boundaries, which is easier if we're all doing the same thing the same way. We are going to go with the Yonder pouch, which from our investigation of nearby districts and other options, it's the one that most places have used successfully and report really good outcomes from. We looked at a couple other options, including a geofencing option, which is kind of a cool high-tech. You block all your apps on your phone when you walk into the building. This one is tried and true. It's been used for a number of years in some of the districts nearby, so we got to see and hear from people who had experience with it. And how it works is pretty simple. As students enter the building, every student is assigned a pouch at the start of the year. It's their own, and they have that for the entire year. They're expected to put their phone, if they have one of these, Apple Watch, earbuds, anything that's wired up, goes into the pouch and turned off and gets locked. And then at the end of the day, that takes a little bit, and there'll be staff members and administrators kind of monitor that. At the end of the day, when they come out, the pouches are magnetized, so it's very fast. And even if a student leaves early, they can just swipe it and access their things and go. That swipe capacity means you can also handle things like field trips, early dismissals, and we even learned from Northridge that a strategy they used, they took one of their magnets and they asked the police department to hold it in a place where there's 24-hour access. So if we have a student who has their phone in a pouch and inadvertently leaves the building without opening it and discovers at 7 o'clock at night, oh my gosh, I can't access my phone, I have something on there that's really important, there's a way to get the phone. Additionally, in an emergency, these bags are made of neoprene. You can rip them open, you can cut them open. They're not, it's not like a lock box that's inaccessible. So there are ways to get them open in the community. Part of what we know we need to do is do a lot of training for our staff to make sure that they really understand how it works and that they're coming at this from a coaching and educational perspective. And again, it's helping to move them back into that teaching and learning role, which they much prefer to being policing that. We'll be piloting support and launching with them in the fall. And administrators in our counseling staff are going to be really integral to supporting that effort. I think especially at first, we know for some of our students this is going to be a hard transition. There are certain kids especially who feel that phone as a sort of safety net, and so it's really important that we're working with those kids individually and specifically to make sure they have other strategies and other tools for how to access people that they know they rely on. And how to feel connected and safe at school. And finally, I think this really requires that we're going to do some ongoing check-in. Stanford University has actually developed a survey tool that we can use to actually measure some of the impact of this as well. We'll be giving that at the start of the year, and then again about halfway through the year, just to see, what are students telling us, what are staff telling us about the efficacy of our approach. Exceptions are important to acknowledge. We have students whose phones are a piece of medical equipment for them. And thankfully, Number has a solution to that. They've kind of been through this. Those students will be issued a pouch that's sort of a non-locking pouch. So for them, it helps them sort of integrate with their classmates. They're carrying a pouch like everyone else, and yet they are able to use their phone to check blood sugar on an ongoing basis. Or if they have another medical need, that's a documented medical need, we have a system for that. And this kind of echoes a little bit of what Chip talked about. The National School Resource Officers Association really says kids having their own phones does not make them safer in a crisis. It distracts them from first responder or teacher directives, and it also can lead to spreading of unverified information. So if students are texting each other, texting their younger siblings, texting their parents about their particular situation, they are seeing only a small part, and they are also children. So what is getting out to the universe may not be the whole story or an accurate story. And I think that's really important to understand. The communication that kids are capable of relaying in that moment may not be the entirety of the story.
We did experience that with the sort of false alarm at the high school in the fall, where everyone's training worked very well. As they would pick students that were using their phones to communicate were actually sharing completely erroneous and false information that did cause quite a bit of hysteria. So real quick on the scenario, our middle school was going through a drill, an active drill, using their PA system. Somehow, some way, through technology, one of the communications at the middle school came over the loudspeaker at the high school. And people heard that and immediately went into their training. But there was never ever a mention of like an active shooter. There was never an active shooter at the high school. Yet, within minutes, that was communicated out. And not having a phone would have, not had that communication go out. And again, it resolved in the end, but that is a true fact. That is exactly, unfortunately, what happens through the game of telephone.
A couple nearby success stories. Members of our team, Kim was there, Jack visited, Matt visited Northridge High School this fall to see their phone-free system in action. They are using Yonder pouches, and they've been doing this for a few years. Actually, this was their third year, I would say, and they've had a lot of success. They saw real data around this. And Northridge is a different school, different population, different set of circumstances. Every school has its own kind of unique culture and climate. But they saw a real decrease in bullying and other sorts of negative incidents, and they saw an increase in attendance and student academic outcomes, which is incredible. FAA Middle School just did this recently in the fall, and I just love some of the quotes that came out of that. They had teachers talking about how kids were just more present, both they were showing up for school literally, and figuratively more present in terms of their engagement with their classmates and their educators. And parents actually at the middle school level said the middle school ban made it easier for them to enforce phone-related rules at home because it's sort of a unified front message. And I do like that about this. I feel like the parents, I had a kiddo, he's 23 now, but he grew up right in this era as phones were becoming a big part of kids' lives. And it's a challenge to be able to set parameters and hold them. Even for somebody who's in a school environment and sort of doing this for other people's children, it's hard for me at home. So having some reinforcement and having a community come together to do it as a group, I think is a great way to start. All right, I wanted to sort of turn things over, so if you have questions for us, we're here. We've got a small group, so we can fire away. I did want to note, Roger Anderson, who's our Director of Wellness, has been really involved in this effort. He was unable to join us tonight because of the family emergency, but we will gladly take whatever questions you have and, or thoughts that you have or ideas. Yes.
What's the responsibility of the student lifting up the pouch? So they lose it. They choose to slice it open.
Right.
You know, my daughter, my old friends of ours, they know they look doing this. They might have told her she didn't. And they put a pencil or that, or they're taking pencils and they're unlocking, you know, so I'm sure you work through this, but very secure.
I think what we've heard from Northbridge is that we should not expect perfection and that there are going to be efforts to sort of circumvent it. We just asked school committee to approve handbook policy around the pouches and how they're handled. And essentially, if a student loses a pouch, first time it's pretty low stakes, it's $5. We'll ask you to replace it. If it's more than once, we'll ask for the full replacement cost. So those are things that we're putting into policy to create some sense of accountability. And for anything that's an issue of vandalizing a pouch, we would treat that like we treat other instances of damaging school property. So, you know, just like we do all the other things, behavior management toolkit.
When you talk about the struggling to adapt to this, is any of it just going to roll out in September, right?
Yes.
Is there any of this being brought up in middle school and high school now to give the kids time to acclimate with? September's already kind of stressful with new school, especially moving to new school and moving from Thanksgiving, really getting like how the summer typically used to be. Yeah, I didn't parents know, but
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I know of 3 cases where we have done some early notification with students and their families, knowing that it's going to be very difficult. It's difficult now without the pouches, but it's about learning the skill of self-awareness, certainly, and self-discipline, trying to build those skills, not just communicate the message, but really help these students understand that that it's going to be okay, that they can kind of cope ahead using a DPT strategy, and that we're going to come up with some replacement strategies for them that are just as effective, but don't involve the phone.
what about on a broader scale to the rest of the students? Are they being told?
So,
I mean, I don't like it.
sure. It's not a secret, you know, and we are talking a lot with the kids. So at our school, we have a number of really, really talented kids on our school council, and this was absolutely a component of our school council discussion. You know, it's out there, and the kids are aware. It's a discussion in social studies class as the bill is making its way through the legislature. The balance is, it hasn't been yet school committee policy. So it's just kind of
Just as of last night. So.
right, but you know, up to this point, yes, we can forecast it and let the kids know that, hey, look, this is on the horizon. This is coming. But it's not now that it's on the books, and we're going to move forward with it. And we've certainly had discussions about how to, at the administrative level, how to address that point in particular. With can we do lessons between now and the end of the year, such that the kids are. So yes, we have to absolutely talk about that.
It was the subject of a mini debate in a history class that I was in just at the end of the day today. They were finished up with one thing, and prior to begin review for final exams, the students said, can we discuss, the cell phone ban? And I was actually in the room and was participating more as a moderator and a resource than I was debating. But to Mr. Foley's point, these were sophomores. They're very aware of it. But we do intend to have a more broader, very specific communication, and not just a one-time thing, but, my administrative team's there all summer. Certainly have students come in and we talk a little bit more specifically about it, what it might look like, what it might feel like. There's going to be situations for anybody of withdrawal, right? So they'll do it, they'll comply, but there will be this thing of, I need it, I need to touch it. So I'm looking to prepare our staff to deal with those things in the moment. I know our staff are looking for some tools around supporting those students in it. I know most of our students will seek that kind of help. So it hasn't been quite explicit yet, but to Mr. Foley's point, they are aware, but we do plan on a little bit more of a detailed communication approach over the next several months.
The biggest impact is going to be 10, 11, 12. So sophomores, juniors, and seniors, they're the ones going to be impacted because they've had them the longest. 7th graders coming out of 6th grade knowing they can't use them. The middle school is known for not being able to use them, and the 8th grade is moving up. This has been their experience, that they can't have them. So next year's 9th grade class shouldn't have a massive impact. The culture change component is going to be for the sophomore, juniors, and seniors.
I have been interviewed by several student journalists
Yeah.
on this topic, so,
Yeah.
more than for anything else. So I think it's out there, but to your point, I think we want to take the opportunity to sort of talk with kids in a more educational way about what we're doing, why we're doing it. And yes, we've talked about doing that through advisory, doing that through some of the other classes, and making sure that they're aware that they haven't done anything wrong. This isn't a punishment. This is us really, it's kind of like when people took on cigarette advertising, this is a very powerful thing, and we're trying to be helpful and provide some guardrails.
I appreciate and applaud what you all are doing. As a parent of 2 teenagers, I've seen the impact of devices on them. And I will go out on one and say mine are addicted to a point that if we try to take their device away for the day, it's okay. So it's going to be tough. That said, I appreciate, the social emotional wellness, the health aspects, the grade aspects, and all that, couple of practical realities, especially for the high school students. So Westborough High School, busy place, a lot of extracurriculars, a lot going on at different places. My kids were always staying after school for something. So I'm staying after school to finish a test. I'm staying after school for a club meeting. Oh, I wanted to stay for this thing, that's going on until 6, whatever it is. And oftentimes, the way I find out about that is when I get a quick text during the day. Oh, Mom, FYI, won't be coming home on the bus. I'm going to stay for this thing, but don't worry, I'll be there if I write it later. Or, Mom, my thing got canceled after school. You need to pick me up at 3 o'clock, whatever it is. So if their phone is in the pouch and you can't send those quick messages during the day, I would thought about how that kind of communication happens, just logistically, and so we know where kids are.
Yeah, we're not sure how massive that reality will be in terms of the number of kids coming down, but like the olden days, they can get a pass to the office and call in the main office, call in a private office. I've had students come to my office and have a telehealth conference for 45 minutes. So I believe we have a very strong culture of two-way communication and response between the people in the building, and certainly we got some work to do with, like any community, with communication with families. But I think if our kids need something, they know how to ask, and I'm kind of proud of them for that, because we respond quite a bit to their questions and stuff. But I think we also plan to make that point very clear, and what the replacement sort of tool, what the replacement strategy for those students that might not have the skill yet to self-manage, but how they can deal with something in the moment that they would normally use their phone for. We definitely have that in the school, and I think it's on us to make sure we're very explicit on where that is and how they can access that. Every classroom has a phone. It's a quick call. I'm sure a teacher would allow a student to quickly use the phone before the bell rings. We have a 15-minute break at 11 o'clock. That's a good time.
Also, we're a one-to-one environment where kids have a laptop too. They can email, they can use messaging with their laptop. And one thing that we're talking about with this group too, is that as a tool for sort of circumventing, just making sure that the laptop itself doesn't become the new thing. And that's going to require some monitoring and more contact.
That was actually my question.
Yeah.
It's like the law of
Well, I think more broadly, we're in a moment in the U.S. in education where we're starting to think about and examine the role of educational technology. And I think that's interesting work to be done. From my vantage point, walking around and seeing it in action in different classes, I think is really well deployed here. I see it being balanced and thoughtful and used in a way that's helping kids access who might not have access otherwise. And we also always want to be vigilant about the balance between tech-assisted learning and just old school, analog, talking to each other, reading a paper book.
I want to touch on something that Allison mentioned that I shared with our team a while ago. And I think the smoking analogy is really apt for a couple of different reasons. So I think when I was in high school, Brooklyn High School was in 1985, there was a student smoking here. Okay, so students were allowed to smoke on campus. Smoking was everywhere at that point. Teachers, students, everything. 1992 Education Reform Bill passed and banned tobacco products on all school campuses. So it was over in time. And I think we are I don't think the analogy is too much of a stretch. Prior to that time, smoking was considered not as concerning as we know it to be now. Okay? I think we're at a national pivot point of realizing that the concerns about social media and the negative impacts of social media on very impressionable kids is at a point where the analogy to are you letting them smoke cigarettes, are you letting them have unfiltered access to technology 24/7. So one's going to have an impact on their physical body, but the other one certainly has an outsized impact on their development and their sense of self-esteem. It's a bit of a stretch for an analogy, but it's in terms of the law changing things and having a significant impact on school cultures and school cultures having to adapt to changes in national politics as well as state politics. I think it's very apt. And if we think about it in terms of, 25, 40 years ago, smoking wasn't a big deal. Now it is. We could be looking back through the rearview mirror, at this time frame and say, oh, I remember when, this was really, really common for kids to be able to use these devices all the time. And we've come a long way. So it seems like we're at a pivot point nationally as well.
To extend that thinking, I wonder if back in 1992, students were aware of the full impact of cigarette smoking. They probably weren't. They just liked the idea of doing it and whatever, but they didn't know the full impact. Our students are telling us, some of the survey data, that they know there's a negative impact. They experience that negative impact. So it gives me hope, I think, that the shift may get more buy-in, as hard as it is with the addictive piece, right? I think the Surgeon General recently said that it's an appendage. So as hard as that's going to be, I have a great deal of faith in our students to want to join us in making this shift. I really do. With good education, good sound practices, good tools to help them with that, good culture that's strong to make sure adults are modeling it the right way, both in school and at home. And that's why these types of things I think are important, because we can align our efforts to do what's in the best interest of our kids who know the dangers of these things.
And we have a responsibility to take care of them. They're telling us this, we're seeing that this is affecting them, and so these changes are going to be helpful. They are children.
I do like there's a bit of research that suggests that no individual student wants their phone taken, but if you ask them if they want all phones taken, they're totally fine with that. I mean, I don't know how many folks have had your kids go to a camp experience or summer experience where it's phone free. My kiddo came back from that. It was like a different kind of a revitalized human. It was a really new thing. So I think that's what we're trying to go for. We're trying to provide that experience of kind of carving out time in kids' lives. We know that there's going to be after school, there's going to be weekends, but this is a little, island of time where they can get used to life without it and develop some skills that I'm excited about it. Thank you for coming this evening. If you have questions that you don't want to ask, with the full group, and you want to reach out individually, please connect with any of us. We're happy to answer questions. And thank you for being our first test audience of this. We'll be doing this a couple times during the summer. So if you have thoughts about information that you think people should have when they as part of this, please let us know. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.